Our 220th Reading Online Sports Economics Seminar. We are generously hosted by the University of Reading, sponsored by Sports Economics Review. We have today Georgy Shukaylo from the University of Michigan, presenting the cost of segregation using Transfermarkt values to model counterfactual outcomes in soccer. But before he starts, just to say that today is also the deadline for the Political Studies Association Sport and Politics Conference up at the University of Liverpool. Jeff Walters is organising that, who is formerly of Birkbeck, and he is keen to get economists along. So if you're an economist and you're of that persuasion, do consider the conference. As we all know, there are plenty of our colleagues in sports economics up at the University of Liverpool, so it is a good forum to be, and so do consider that. It's in the reminder. It's a 250-word abstract to go to Jeff today. Also, the deadline that was last week for the first Central Asian Conference on Sports Science in Tashkent in Uzbekistan. Now, that deadline has been extended by a week, so you can still submit through until the end of Sunday. So please do consider that. It is the new Uzbekistan University in Tashkent, and you may never have been to Tashkent before. It's a fantastic place, I can say, having been there a few times. It is a fascinating place. There is a cultural tour to Samarkand, planned as part of the conference on the Silk Route, and it's a very interesting part of the world, a former Soviet republic. So do look up the first Central Asian Conference on Sports Science. I don't want to hold up George any longer. He's happy to take questions at any point, but we'll prefer them at the end. Georgie, the floor is all yours.
Okay, great. So see. All right, can you see this now?
Yep, got it.
All right, perfect. Let me just do full screen. Okay, thank you everyone for being here. Good morning, good afternoon, depending on which part of the world you are. So thank you, James, very much for hosting us, and to Sports Economics Review for generously sponsoring the seminar series. This is a joint work with Dr. Stefan Szymanski, who I think is on the call now. So once again, the title is The Cost of Segregation, and we're using Transfermarkt values to model counterfactual outcomes in soccer. So the proposition for this paper is very simple. So if the objective is to select an n number of objects within a given characteristic, if you reduce the pool from which the selection occurs, that would reduce the probability of finding those n objects. So simple, very elementary. So in terms of the corollary as it relates to our context, in searching for the best number of soccer players from a given country, the expected average quality of these players would rise as the size of the pool is increasing. So, for instance, the proposition here is that if there are more soccer players in the country that are registered, hence you can find the best average national selection. The application which we're testing this proposition here is that the expected performance of a national soccer team is expected to decline as the selection is restricted to a subset of the population. And specifically, we're going to be looking at black or non-black black players. This is where the frame in which we're using segregation term in. So just briefly, a little aside, segregation is different from discrimination. We want to underscore that, very clearly. Historically, there have been various contexts of racial segregation in both society and sports. So one of the examples that comes to mind is apartheid regime in South Africa. That was the regime of segregation based on race. And in sports, it has also existed, and Dr. Szymanski, my co-author, has done extensive work in that regard, especially with a new paper on the era of white captain in cricket in the Caribbean. Once again, specifically, why is segregation different from discrimination? It is different in the sense that workers from within two different countries without free movement of labor are segregated, but they may not be necessarily facing discrimination. So those might be two parallel systems that never intersect. However, we do here reference one of the classic pieces in literature, Stiglitz, 1973, under the constant returns to scale with free trade in commodities. Under the factor price equalization theorem, labor is allocated efficiently and gains from trade are exploited. In terms of the national team selection, it does not really satisfy constant returns with free trade. The objective for the national selection is to choose the national team that is the absolute very best from a given pool that you have, hence restricted by nationality. We do have to know that the very best team by itself, this proposition, is an increasing returns to scale technology. So if we were to just give a simple example in percentage terms, every 10% increase in national team performance, like going an extra stage in an international tournament, would increase support more than by 10%. So that means that all of a sudden there's a soccer boom, and there has been extensive evidence from various case study and overview papers that look at this. For instance, one of the more recent one is Craig Depkin with one of the co-authors has looked at Croatia as an example in terms of soccer. Under increasing returns to scale, if you segregate talent, that would constrain the ability to form the single best team and hence reduce the expected performance. So this is the proposition that we want to test. A little example from history that also has to deal with segregation, which unfortunately we do not have the ability to test, is baseball in the US. So Jackie Robinson, we all know famously, has officially broken the color barrier, quote unquote, in 1947. It wasn't until the early 1960s that there was a full integration. But then prior to integration, what we want to focus on here is that talent in the US baseball was split across two types of leagues. The integration of black players then raised the quality of play in the major leagues by drafting elite players from the Negro leagues. Intuitively, you would think that a counterfactual 1960s Major League Baseball without black players would have resembled something of the pre-integration era. Certainly, it was competitive, but it wasn't the absolute best access to talent from a wider range of population. However, yes, we do not have the empirical test of this proposition. However, in the soccer context, we do. So hence, our research question specifically here is, what is the performance cost of talent segregation and national team selection? And what we do in this study is we model match outcomes as a function of relative England men's national team quality using the Transfermarkt, henceforth referred to as TM, player evaluations. And then we construct the counterfactual national teams under racial segregation. So there are two counterfactual scenarios where there is a black-only English team, national team, and then there is the non-black-only men's national team. And we look at their expected performance. And we evaluate the impact of segregation specifically on the aggregate team Transfermarkt valuations and valuations by position. Does it percolate to the smaller subsets of players? In terms of the team, those are the match level outcomes, wins, draw, and losses, and the probabilities of such outcomes. We also look at those, as well as the progression probabilities. We slightly touch on this in our paper. In terms of the team diversity literature, we will offer a table in the next slide, but just to give you a brief overview, there is a lot of mixed evidence on whether diversity in sports is somehow is affecting performance, and nationality is the most widely used factor in the recent literature, especially. In terms of prior literature, that has been investigating the impact of discrimination on team performance, but not necessarily diversity. And then there is this also simple proposition that if player ability itself is affected by team diversity, then there has to be some mechanism for separating intrinsic ability of that player from diversity-mediated ability. And then Papps et al. 2011 is one of the studies that uses the estimate of ability based only on past performances, not necessarily the diversity-mediated type of ability. So here is the overview of the literature. We have located 17 studies dating back to 2009 all the way back to 2025. And of those, you see that in yellow, we've highlighted 12 studies that look at the effect of diversity on team performance, are concerned with various soccer contexts. So this literature is largely informed by soccer. So out of those studies, 6 out of 12 would be concerned with Transfermarkt values for as a proxy for ability measures. And as you see, this blue highlight sort of highlighted a lot of the more recent literature. So we know that Transfermarkt values are a well-established factor, that a well-established proxy for ability in the soccer literature. So Transfermarkt is a website that would publish crowdsourced estimates of player values. So they have more than 500,000 unique players dating back to 2004. And the way that Transfermarkt values have been mostly used in the literature, primarily as a substitute for player salaries or transfer fees. So there have been various evidence that when the Transfermarkt values when the actual transfer fees or player salaries are available, you do confirm them to the Transfermarkt values. There is evidence by Herm et al. And Prochl and Frick that they are pretty accurate estimates. Kos and Parshakov, however, have a different opinion. But our approach is more of the second way that Transfermarkt values are used in the literature. We use that as a predictor of match outcome. And Thomas Peters in 2018 has shown that the Transfermarkt values are very good predictors of how the match is going to go. So we are extending this application to the measurement of team diversity and performance, but to stress it once again, we use it to just as a clear predictor of match outcomes, not necessarily whether or not they are good predictors of player salaries or transfer fees. So we do know, this is prior research by Stefan, that from the 2021 UK census, 5% of the UK population identifies as Black, and 40% of professional English soccer players identify as Black. So this is sort of more of a 50-50 split in terms of the player pool, whereas, yes, it is still very much a minority in terms of the overall UK population. And Black players, we know there's a lot of evidence that they have consistently occupied some of the most influential roles within the national teams at different levels. From our own calculations, too, of some of the best players on the team, the attackers, Bukayo Saka, Raheem Sterling, have alone accounted for 10 out of 11 goals in some capacity en route to the UEFA Euro 2021 final, which was one of the more recent successes on the international stage for England's men's national team. And Black players we also tested they're among the highest valued members of the squad by Transfermarkt valuation. So we know from here that their exclusion would be analytically meaningful for counterfactual analysis. In terms of the talent expenditure, I will briefly touch on this literature that we do know from some of the seminal works that increasing expenditure on your play and talent on your players would improve your expected team performance, your expected outcomes, success. However, there's also the robust conclusion of the same notion in soccer. But on national teams, however, there's also evidence that players do not receive compensation. We obviously know that. So hence, they are motivated rather by pride and the publicity effect. In terms of the forecasting and counterfactual modeling in sports, there have been different other contexts in which outcome probabilities have been estimated. So, for instance, historical results, betting odds, ELO ratings, they're all different contexts, but still, this modeling is based on structural team characteristics, and player level valuations have only gained traction recently. For instance, in IO, in different subsets of the literature, counterfactual estimation is a long-time used tool for impact assessment as well as policy evaluation. So the objective here, once again, is to identify the expected performance of England's men's national team under the counterfactual assumption that it was segregated. The issue here is that there's not really a control group, so we take an alternative approach to how we identify the counterfactual. So we calculate the expected performance based on betting odds. So we devig the betting odds, and then compared with the ratios of sums of Transfermarkt values of the starting 11 for two squads. So where our data comes from, we scrape around 3,300 competitive international soccer matches dating all the way back to 2016 from fbref.com, and then use the crosswalk to then merge it to Transfermarkt valuations by players. From FBref, we also take the match outcomes, the number of goals scored, the venues where it was played to account for whether or not it was a true home game or a game at, say, some high-level international tournament like the FIFA World Cup, whether it was played in a neutral venue, the information of the starting 11, as well as all the substitutes and how many minutes they played, as well as all the other game-level player statistics, such as goals, yellow cards, etc., etc. And the three result betting odds, meaning we have odds only for win, draw, and loss. They are scraped from oddsportal.com for these respective 3,340 matches. In terms of the player valuation data, we scrape every single tier 1 league that we can get access to via Transfermarkt. That is 116 tier 1 leagues. And there are some select tier 2 and tier 3 leagues that we also scrape. For instance, the English Championship is the highest valued second tier league in the world. So a lot of the nationals of various countries play there as opposed to tier 1 leagues. And so we also want to include them. And then it also percolates to some select tier 3 leagues where there are players of certain nationalities that do represent their national team, and they play in the third tier league in some very advanced national league system. So in the end, if we look at player year evaluations, we end up with about 550 of those. And when you look at this by individual players, it's just over 130,000 of unique players that we end up having in the sample. So in terms of the match characteristics, we can come back to these odds, to these descriptive statistics, but here we just want to show that we convert the odds, and we see that there is a somewhat, indication somewhat of home advantage in terms of the devig probabilities, and then as well as the team valuation means and medians and so on and so forth. And then in terms of the summary statistics of individual players, we also have these, and we see overall the one thing that I'm going to just highlight is that the mean is in thousands of euros, is rising all the way to 2024, and we know that it has just surpassed that the average player valued on Transfermarkt is just over $1 million as of 2024 in euros. So then, in terms of the order logistic regression, this is how we set things up. So first, we define xi as the relative strength of the two teams, which is a log transformed ratio of the aggregate value of the home team to the aggregate value of the away team. So then, by inference, if it is more than 0, then the home team is going to be favored. The less than 0 would favor the away team. And then x equals 0 would correspond to the equal aggregate team valuations, even though we don't explicitly observe that. And match outcomes are then ordered for the setup. So y of 0 identifies home loss, y of 1 identifies draw, and y of 2 identifies the home win. And these are the probabilities that we estimate. So there are probabilities of, once again, the away win, the draw, which comes next, and the third line would be the probability of the home win. The coefficient beta here governs how valuation differences shift across outcome probabilities. We have two cut points that they are concerned with the latent match dominance scale. And probabilities are mutually exclusive and collectively exhaustive. That means that there is no fourth outcome that is not included here. And we also have a dummy variable for neutral venue games, as evidenced by prior literature, that neutral venue games take away the home advantage for the formal home team in the matchup. And these are the results of our ordered logistic regression. So this is more so to note quickly that the models have relatively good fit. And in terms of the cut points, we do identify the regions in which it is likely to be an away win, a draw, or a home win. And then we take these coefficient and test this on the model validity. How does our model perform compared to the bookmaker odds? So this is the benchmark here. So if we look at the total number where there was a home win recorded, we see that the model is also correct in the same number of the exact same number of cases that the bookmaker is correct. However, we see that the correlation coefficient is not 1. So these are different games that the Transfermarkt value ratio can predict better. In terms of draws, we do have to note that the recent literature has shown that draws are notoriously hard to predict. And we're seeing that our model is not specifically designed to predict draws, but the bookmaker also only gets the draw outcome correct in about 2% of the cases. And in terms of the away win, our model slightly is lacking, but behind the bookmaker, but again, very, very comparable. Yes, that's Danielle, I think.
So here a correct prediction is that the highest of the 3 outcomes is the one that actually happens, regardless if it's 40% 30-30 versus 90% 5-5.
Yes, precisely. So if yes, we define bookmaker correctness if bookmaker evaluated one of the 3 outcomes with a higher % implied probability. Yes.
But could you calculate like a sort of a Breyer score on the the distance between the realized outcome and your predicted probabilities, or some other probabilistic scoring function?
Yes, we have.
Oh, sorry, I didn't see that. Yeah.
In the appendix. So if you don't mind, could we touch on them in the end? But
yeah, no, that's okay. I mean, yeah, that's it. Go ahead. Sorry, I didn't see that.
Yep, we do have that. So so these results end up supporting the models used for the use of counterfactual estimation, that yes, indeed, it is an accurate measure. Yes, Alex.
So it's a bit tricky because you say our model is relatively okay, but do you compare to any other model except for because it's a functional form that you show us, but I can come up with a different functional form like Transfermarkt of home team divided by the sum of the Transfermarkt sums of both teams, for example. So because you make here some very strong statements that our model is relatively good, but I don't see comparison to any other model.
Yeah. So yes, I see your point. However, we take the bookmaker odds as the best possible model. There's nothing better than the bookmaker's odds in terms of predicting, because they track thousands of data points and a lot of variables that we might not have access to. All this is to show is that the Transfermarkt valuation-based model that we selected performs well against the bookmaker odds, not necessarily against other Transfermarkt value-based or not models.
No, but I didn't mean that. I meant that, okay, compare it to the betting odds, but take another functional even form, even based on the betting on the Transfermarkt. So you use this ratio of home team versus away team, but the Talok version of probabilities could tell you a different story, I guess. Just as a comparison, because you say, look, we use this model and it seems to be okay. So I kind of
My statement is as opposed to your statement, that at least compare it to another one, and Stefan might want to.
Yes, Stefan
Lie.
definitely does want to. Yeah. So Alex, if there's another model, whether it's a different prioritization or some other model of this that you can predict results, and that's going to be better than our model, then it's also inevitably going to be better than the bookmakers. And if it's better than the bookmakers, what are we even doing here? We should be going and making infinite sums of money by beating the bookies. That's the fundamental point. That the bookmaker is the benchmark because there's no evidence that anybody can really systematically beat the bookies.
Yeah, so Stefan, thank you for chiming in. Yes, so once again, just to reiterate, we do see the value of testing other models. Perhaps we can get closer to what the bookmaker is, but we will never exceed. We will never bid the bookmaker with a Transfermarkt value model. But yes, we will test, Alex, whether the Talc version of Transfermarkt based predictive model is better. So we will play with a functional form. Thank you for that suggestion. Daniela, did you have also your hand up for a second?
No, go ahead. I'll ask later.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you. So, and then we specifically only look at we have 80 games out of 3,340 games in the sample, and we need to see whether the model performs well just in those games. So we do see that in certain cases it is even slightly better than the overall sample. Some of the two illustrative cases that are missed by our model are very high-stake games against France in the FIFA World Cup quarterfinals and the 2024 Euro finals against Spain. So again, very high-stakes game where the bookmakers definitely, due to the exposure of those games, had a lot more data points to analyze, and Transfermarkt values miss there. So they falsely predict that England would win those games, but they end up not winning. So in terms of the average Transfermarkt values and how we compose the rosters for our counterfactual modeling, this is simple race classification, black and non-black. There are archival records from englandfootballonline.com. And then there's supplementary expert coding for the replacement players that have never played for the England national team, that we don't necessarily have an outside resource like englandfootballonline.com to reference their race classification. And then in terms of the counterfactual selection pool, they are drawn from the top 40 English players by position and footedness, and I'll explain exactly how that goes across the 9 top European leagues. So there are 8 top-tier leagues that are consistently ranking in the top 10 by aggregate Transfermarkt valuation, like EPL, La Liga, etc. And just because the impact of championship is so large, we also include the championship, and that is also a domestic pool that you would expect a lot of English nationals to be playing in the championship that are also highly valued on Transfermarkt. So in total, we have 2,571 unique player valuations, including players with dual citizenship that are eligible to be playing for England and have not played for another representation before. So here are the steps in the counterfactual scenario preparation, and I will also show you the example. We begin with the actual starting 11 and their Transfermarkt valuations. We do have robustness checks for anyone that might be wondering what happens in posterior when you do know that, say, Reece James was substituted by Alexander Arnold for 45 minutes. What happens then? The impact of super subs. We explain that in the appendix of the paper. So the results are also the same there. Players are classified by race, position, and footedness. So this is what we look at, the 3 constraints. Then to construct counterfactual teams, we iteratively replace either all black or non-black players. The one caveat is that the players must not be injured, and the data on injuries we also scrape from Transfermarkt. And for each counterfactual lineup, we then recompute the aggregate team valuation and then hence using our coefficients from the earlier described model, generate the prediction outcome probabilities. So for instance, let's imagine the task in the illustrative example is to replace the starter Bukayo Saka, who is a right winger. So we go down the list, and of course we have to control for the position. These are all right wingers on the list. This is just the top of that 40, the 15 top rated right wingers as of 2024. So Saka has to be replaced. We go down the list. So the first possible replacement would be Phil Foden, who was injured at the time. Then we go down to Ethan Nwaneri, who would be the next best replacement. However, Ethan Nwaneri identifies as black, and we cannot have him as a suitable replacement for Saka. We go further down the list. Jared Bowen is non-black and is a suitable replacement. So the overall TM valuation of the team in this case with this replacement falls down by 105 million euros. And then if we look at the roster composition and positionality,
So could you go back to the table before? So there's one thing that sort of jumps out from here is that, the transfer market values are heavily influenced by age. So Ethan Nwaneri is a, very young player. I'm not sure that right now he's somebody that, a typical coach would pick ahead of some of the other, players on that list. But, he, because of his, future valuation, his transfer market value is, is very high. So, perhaps a suggestion could be to, replace current transfer market value to some, age-adjusted transfer market value where, you're not overvaluing, 18 and 19-year-olds with a high potential but haven't quite proven themselves, or undervaluing older players who are still very effective, but, they're approaching the end of their career and, perhaps their transfer value is, does not quite reflect what their, actual abilities are.
Yep, thank you very much for that suggestion. We did have that discussion. We just decided to sort of for the sake of the first pass to not apply the logic that the managers do apply, because yes, sometimes in a lot of Stefan.
Yeah, I mean, this comes back to Alex's point though. If this were true, Daniel, then surely an age-adjusted transfer mark valuation would explain the performance of the team. Would predict the results more efficiently than the actual transfer mark valuations. In which case, we'd essentially have a model that would largely outperform the bookmakers, and that's the thing that I don't see how that's going to be feasible.
I don't think it necessarily outperforms the bookmakers, but it could outperform the non-age adjusted transfer market valuation.
But the transfer mark values actually perform almost exactly in line with the bookmakers. So maybe you're saying there's some tiny little improvement that could be made, and maybe that's true, but you're surely not saying that there's any substantial number of increased successful identifications of the match outcome that you could get by that method.
Okay, I mean, it's an empirical question, but sure.
But I just want to say, I always think about what's the benchmark here. I mean, what is the upper bound in your mind of what a predictive model using these kind of values could achieve?
I think that thinking of the bookmakers as the upper value is valid, and you said that it's the unadjusted is almost as good as the bookmakers. And there's an interval between almost as good and almost as good, and maybe you want almost as good that does better than almost as good.
No, that's I say that.
And maybe the marginal improvement is so small that it makes no difference. But I'm just curious.
Yeah, no, fair point. Thank you,
Alex.
So basically, Daniele replied to Stefan regarding his answer, because I wasn't looking for the best model, but just maybe the one compared to the one that is proposed now. But that's already doesn't matter. My question is regarding how did you define the race? Who defined the race?
So England Football Online, the expert at England Football Online, and then we also check those against expert coding, as well as supplemented for non-capped players that have never played for the English national team.
So there was some raters of the race. You hired students, or sorry, I didn't understand.
No, these were definitely not students. So this was an expert, person.
One expert, several.
Well, for England Football Online, I think there was several, but then was further double checked with one more.
Okay.
Yeah, if I could perhaps jump in here as well and say, so, I mean, the issue with identification is that if you've got a sample of individuals and you want to know what race they are, if you don't know anything about them, you would want to go for self-identification if you can. If you can't do that, you're going to then, we've seen these methods now with skin tone and so forth. But when it comes to black footballers playing for England, these identifications are well known. We're talking about stars here. These are basically very famous people, and their identification is not really in any doubt. There's not that whether they identify as black or not black, that's something that is in the public domain. The question about the replacement players, which is a very small subset of the total, for those players, there's an organization called the Black Footballers Partnership that I work for, and they represent they represent black players in English football, and Delroy Coronaldi, who heads that up, we asked him to identify who he believed were the black players there. So that's the expert.
All right, good. Thank you all very much for suggestions. So once again,
sorry, Georgy, just before we go on here, I was just wondering. So currently, it seems that you find the counterfactual solely based on Transfermarkt. Would it maybe make sense to look at who was sitting on the bench as a first best replacement?
Yeah, it could be that, but again, this also ties back into the literature of super subs. We did think of that, but some players are deliberately, there's evidence that players in soccer are deliberately left on the bench for one reason or another to boost the overall performance. And if you have a possible replacement that is on the bench, that perhaps he was meant to be on the bench, and we don't know what the coach's mind would have been. Oh, okay. Hands go up.
Okay. Maybe I stirred something up. Thank you for the answer.
Yeah.
Is it my turn? No. Number two.
I believe so, yeah, because Jonas already, I think, asked.
No, I was just interested for curiosity, how distant is the actual lineup that is fielded from the optimal Transfermarkt-based lineup that, your algorithm would field?
That is the very next slide. So we do show those mean valuations and all the other summary statistics, and actually show how different they are with t-tests. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Just a quick one, jumping on to Jonas's point. Defensively, I doubt you're going to have super subs there. But it's more likely going to be more of the attacking positions, if anything. So maybe that's the way that if you are putting Jonas's robustness testing or something like that, that's maybe the way to go forward. If you're not going to bring a centre half on, if you're chasing 2 or 3 goals and need some magic, you might do it for this 1 goal or something. So it's probably more at the margin, if anything, where those super subs come in. But yeah, it's more defensive players, I'd say, versus attacking players.
Yeah, certainly. I think, we can weight it towards defensive positions, but overall, yes. If we also have this robustness check where if we just say that we rank it by posterior players, so we prorate each player's participation by 90 minutes in the match. So, and then we find exactly the very similar results. So in the end, even if it's a change that happened that did not take position into account, it was roughly the same in terms of Transfermarkt value and how much time that Transfermarkt value assigned to a player has spent on the pitch. Jonas, do you still have a question, or is it Dennis next?
Sorry, I need to take down the hand.
Georgy, I just want to be sure I understand. When you get the value of the roster, is it everybody on a game day roster? And do you have the same size roster on the counterfactual team, or is it only the starting players?
So in the main specification, it's only the starting players and only the counterfactuals of the starting players. We do have a robustness check with everyone who was on the match list. However, if the player plays 0 minutes in the minute adjusted robustness check specification, we don't count that player's contribution in terms of his Transfermarkt value. So in the prorated version, say if a player played 60 minutes, that would count 2/3 time his valuation, and the player that subbed on would be 1/3 times his valuation.
Okay, and do you, let me think about reformulating my question after I hear more what you're going to say.
Yep, thank you. Jonas, do you have another comment?
No, I'm very sorry. I thought I took down my hand.
I think you did, and then it reappeared. Okay.
Okay, sorry about that.
We'll move on. Okay, so in terms of the roster composition and positionality, what we're looking at here, so we group the positions by a larger group and then into smaller positional subgroups. And we see that for every scenario, the actual mean, so actually what the England national team had on the roster is always higher than the replacement non-black England. So this is essentially the English national team consisting of all non-black players. And then this one would be the black-only England. And what we do show here in the ratios is that sometimes these ratios are above 1. That means they would favor the non-black England counterfactual scenario. Other times you see that the average valuation of, the aggregate valuation of, say, left wingers here would be higher for the black-only England, but we don't see by larger positional groups any systematic favoring in terms of one group or the other. It just is, to us, it shows that it's next to randomly spread among the two counterfactual scenarios. The one exclusion of that rule is the goalkeeper. So without spending too much time on it, yes, there is a lot of literature and proof that there has been a historical shortage of black goalkeepers in English football. So we will also touch on that if we do have the time, if someone has the question. However, this is not a main part of the analysis, but we also have one other counterfactual model that just has black-only England without the goalkeeper, and that model also performs similarly to the ones that we're going to describe. Okay, so in terms of the, Alex.
Sorry to interrupt. Given the time into this research also about race, and I know how difficult it is to define race, it's not trivial. Actually, it seems very trivial, but it's not. So for example, I'll give you an example. This guy Kieran Trippier. What's the definition of his race? Because
Trippier,
Trippier. You know, his father is Jamaican. His mother is white. How he defines himself?
Well, according to multiple sources that, again, we second verified with, as well as the englandfootballonline.com, he would be in our model specifically, if you're asking about that specific player, identified as black.
Okay.
We can't go further. I mean, the exercise here, really the main point we're trying to bring across is, if you do any form of segregation, you restrict your access to a group of the talent pool. So you're shrinking your talent pool artificially, and that in turn restricts your ability to pick the single best team out of that population. Okay, so this is what I was referencing previously. So we see that the actual England team, in terms of the starting 11, has an average value of around 600 millions of the starting 11. But then, if we look further down, we see that there is a significant decrease for either of the two counterfactual scenarios. And we also see the percentage change in mean. So that's about 23 to 26% lower on average compared to the observed lineup in the actual case of England. Once again, I will retouch that we do have this robustness model where we include the goalkeeper. So then, yes, these are aggregate Transfermarkt valuations. The next step is to see, well, how much does the win probability suffer a decrease in either of the counterfactual scenarios? And for this, we basically imply that the same model, the Transfermarkt model we've had before. So the win probability between the two scenarios would only go down between 2.7 and 3.3%. England still would remain a clear favorite on average. And that we largely attribute to the large talent pool that England has and may not hold up in other scenarios and other contexts. But yes, what it is to prove here is that they are still statistically significant decreases, even though magnitudinally they may look very small. And one might argue, well, 73.5% win probability compared to 70.2% probability is not that much of a decrease, but they are statistically significant decreases. And then they would also matter in terms of progression probability. So here's the example out of the UEFA Euro 2024, where England has reached the finals. And then if we look at the actual progression probabilities, so the very first one is when the, yes, Jorge?
Hi, I have a question which I arrived like 10 minutes ago, so maybe it doesn't make sense. But do you in this counterfactual exercises, do you change the entire team? Like the example you were looking at, you were showing us earlier about I don't remember the players, but you were kind of looking, we're going down until we find this ideal player because he's non-black and he's non-black and he's not injured and all this stuff. So when you do this counterfactual exercises, do you change the entire team?
Yes, we changed the entire valuation of the team by virtue of iteratively replacing players that were on the pitch. So say, for instance, in our classification, right, that's just binary between black and non-black. Say the starting 11 in the actual scenarios had 7 black players, 4 non-black players. We need to make a non-black only
so
England scenario.
Kind of change the black players.
So, yeah, we replace the 7 black players.
So my question is, I guess, is football is referred to pure football? Is the fact that if you change 7 players, these counterfactuals are kind of biased in the sense that you have your English national team. They used to play. They are it's very difficult for the coach to change 7 players. So in a sense, maybe actual football probabilities would depend more on how used they are to play together. I don't know if I wouldn't know exactly if you can actually measure that, maybe, but at least this is kind of a benchmark what you're finding here, because I would say that the more players you change because they're black or whatever reasons, the less chances you have to actually make the same sporting result.
I think we will address that next because there is a little robustness check after this. So I think we're addressing what you're trying to say here is the team composition effects. So this is actually coming up in the very next slide after I talk about the progression probabilities. So in terms of the progression probabilities, again, this is very clearly here that it progressively goes down in terms of the actual percentage change in progression probability to the next stage of a knockout tournament. So we're seeing that iteratively the chances of getting further closer to the finals go further down under the counterfactual. So as Jorge mentioned, we do say that we do acknowledge that Transfermarkt valuations would proxy individual ability, but they cannot unfortunately capture the within team interaction effects. So the bookmaker odds would provide an equilibrium market, and they look at a lot of, they obviously look at the measurable quality and ability of the players. They also look at the unobserved factors. So hence the bookmaker's model is that benchmark to which we're comparing everything. There are things like player cohesion, compatibility, and the tactical fit. And any diversity-related interaction effects are also captured by the bookmakers. And again, if we, as Stefan mentioned, if we would know or exceed the bookmaker probabilities and build a model, we can all just take a Roses vacation to the Bahamas and maybe even retire there. So if the interaction effects do exist, then markets are at least weak form efficient, and they should appear in the gap between first the bookmaker implied win probability and the Transfermarkt model predicted, so our model win probability here. So to measure the diversity of the starting 11, we use Blau's index and actually a scaled Blau's index. If SI is the share of black players in a certain match, then the standard Blau index would be scaled from 0 to 0.5, 0 being that the team is fully homogeneous, and 0.5 being that the team has equal representation. We have an odd number, 11 starting players, so it is never quite reaching that higher benchmark. It will always be slightly, we will be going towards equal representation, but you can never have that with even numbers. For interpretability, we just scale the Blau's index, we multiply it by 2 to have the diversity index stretch from 0 to 1, again, for easier interpretability. And then this is our model that we are running. So the dependent variable here is the difference between the bookmaker probability and the England win probability. So to what extent is explained by the diversity index of the team at any given match, whether or not England plays at home. So we do add that dummy to account for the home field advantage. We do have the valuation of the opponent as well. So if they're playing a more valued team versus not, and then we do include the year dummies that are all relative to the 16-17 base period. And the main coefficient of interest here is the diversity index. While the point coefficient is positive, it is not statistically significant, so we cannot accurately say on the sample of 80 England national team matches that the diversity index of the team would indeed be a factor. So we do run a little robustness here and conclude that individual player valuations are the ones that really matter in our instance. So to wrap this up, we apply Beckerian discrimination theory to segregation in sports. We know under the Beckerian discrimination theory that discrimination has costs. However, again, as we mentioned in the beginning, segregation is different from discrimination, and we do conclude that racially segregational or any segregational policies impose opportunity costs by constraining access to the top talent. Counterfactual segregation scenarios would lower aggregate national team quality and expected win probabilities through the following mechanisms like positional scarcity, reduced depth, as well as constrained replacement pools. And although these marginal effects would appear modest in terms of their absolute scale, they're certainly statistically significant, and they do also compound in knockout tournament formats where progression to the next stage matters to activate that a positive return to scale technology. So in terms of the applying counterfactual to other settings, we would encourage researchers to not just view counterfactual modeling as a statistical exercise, but perhaps apply this to other contexts. So we do think that our framework is very portable. For instance, in France, we identify that there have been a lot of discontent among certain politicians when famously saying that this French team does not look French enough to me. So, sport has been politicized there, even amid the national team success. In Italy, there's also notion of other exclusionary practices where there are also some discontent among certain groups where national belonging intersects with race and migration. So, for instance, like this this Italian team is formed of too many immigrants, for instance, is the criticism that they are hearing. So to us, counterfactual modeling would provide a way to quantify the competitive cost of racial or frankly any segregation, like in Italian context that might be national or immigrant-based status segregation. And then our approach can be extended, right, to nationality, citizenship status, any way you can frankly segregate the pool. So one last slide, why the case of England really matters. And this is sort of what started this whole research, is while we did show the statistics that in England, 40% of players are Black. However, only 3% of managers or coaches are Black, and we don't have any counterfactual, any way to construct a counterfactual model for the performance of coaches. But we want to show, first of all, cement the notion that the contribution of Black players is really very statistically significant, and if you replace them or frankly do any form of segregation, that would harm the manager's ability to select the best national team. And then once again, to reiterate that this is all about access to a larger talent pool to select the very best national team, and performance would suffer if you somehow restrict that and segregate that. So I'd like to thank you all for your attention and the feedback that has already been provided. We highly value that. Here are our emails in case you have to run and would like to reach out further. But now we would like to welcome any questions, comments, and feedback after the presentation. Thank you all very much for your attention.
Thank you, Georgy, and spectacular effort dealing with a lot of questions along the way. Still managing to finish exactly at 3:30, so taking the exact hour. So we've still got lots of time for further questions and comments, and Johan has already got his hand up, so Johan, go ahead.
Hi Georgie, well done. That's really interesting stuff. You as well, Stefan. Just a quick one on this one in terms of it's probably quite a pedantic comment, but one that I think reviewers might pick up. So with the ordered logit, one of the first things I was taught when in my Econometrics 101 was to make sure you've got that proportional odds assumption sorted. So whether that's just reporting a Brandt test or something in the paper, that probably would be beneficial for some reviewers. It might also have something to explain potentially about the draws, because I can't remember the summary statistics, but did you get 0 of them correct, even though they're hard to predict? It just might be something there. So that's all. But good job. Enjoyed it.
Yes. So the odds predict. So there are only 15 cases where the bookmaker identifies the draw correctly, but draws don't happen too frequently. But yes, very good point. We will incorporate the Brandt test. Thank you very much.
Then Gidon has his hand up next.
Yeah, Georgie, hope you can hear me.
Yep.
Excellent. Very interesting stuff. And actually, I think, taking into North American context, the debate about quarterbacks is a very important conversation about bias in history. Regarding your data, I have a few questions. You can answer them now or not. One is, do you consider also injuries and availability of players?
Yes,
in some instances, some players might have not been available to play, therefore just consideration.
Yes, we do. And I think, I'm sorry for not making it explicit, but yes, to answer your question, that the replacement players must not be injured at game time. Yep.
Okay. So sorry if I missed that. Yeah. The other question I have about the valuations and the etc. is, One, do we find that there's a bias in valuations against certain players in the transfer market website, as in, and then I guess another question is, would you consider about the value of the player the year before the actual game, not the year of? So I don't remember how you define the value of the player, because valuations, from what I just looked online at Transfermarkt, is they value also if they played in international events or not.
Yep.
So I'd be curious if we actually looked at the value of players before the year of, say, the match or the tournament.
Yeah,
I don't know if that's relevant. I might be wrong on this. I'm just curious about, just because the way Transfermarkt works is it updates often. So if a player plays for England, then the value might go up, which means if one of those players that didn't play for England that you said could have played for England if they were in it, then their value goes up.
Yeah, so we do have some slides in the in how we say handle missing information. But to answer your question specifically, is that we treat the season from by the fall spring context, which is the predominantly how it is played in most of the world and most of the competitive leagues that are in our sample to construct our model. So, but then we change it between two scenarios. So the season before or the actual season. So like, I see your point that a player might be selected to the national selection because their previous season has been successful as opposed to this current one. So in changing that, that is producing roughly the same outcomes. So we just report the ones in the current season. So for instance, if it is season 23-24, we have a valuation on the player that comes in, say, December 2023, just before the winter pause. Then that player plays in UEFA Euro 2024. That this is the most recent valuation that we have. If there are multiple valuations throughout the year, like a player has done something significant, we take the most recent valuation, and then if there's a transfer between clubs, we average those valuations. And then there are also a lot of cases for some countries that are perhaps not as well represented in Transfermarkt. So the absolute lowest benchmark for any player to have a valuation is 10,000 euros. So we value all players who we cannot find through this extensive scraping of all the tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 competitions. We replace their evaluation for that year with 10,000 euros.
Yeah. No, I have other questions, but I can send that separately and chat with you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Danielle.
Yeah, so very interesting. I like this idea of using this counterfactual method to sort of ask questions. The question you're asking is in a sense somewhat not really realistic, and I don't think anybody would advocate going back to a racial segregation model of national team selection. But you could ask additional questions, which are, for example, what if we have a quota on the number of black players, or in the French case, the number of immigrant players versus, or players of not French origin that don't look like French, and how that would impact the performance of the national team. So I think that would be another interesting direction to explore.
Yes, certainly. Thank you for that suggestion. Well, yes. So we do state in the beginning. Stefan, would you like to answer that?
Well, you go first, Georgy, and then I'll give my answer. Go on.
Yeah, I would just say that yes, while racial segregation has been sort of the anathema, and we all understand we're not going back to it. There are certain constant. So all I will say is this: is that the groups that are advocating, even inadvertently, for not necessarily maybe what we're describing, which is total segregation, to say partial segregation or say proportionality. Well, we don't hear the exact propositions of, let's say, hey, in England, there's only 5% of the population is black. Let's restrict the national team selection to only have 5% black players. For instance, in the French context, that is very clear, is that that politician that I'm referring to, and again, not saying any names, but has a lot of traction and has recently gotten a lot of vote in the most recent French elections. But they're saying that, plain and simple, and that, resonates in a lot of heads for people that might want to go to full segregation, of just saying that the team does not look French enough to me, which whatever the heck does it, even mean in the context that, France used to be a vast empire stretching across multiple continents. And anyway, so all that is to say that we will try to look at the different quotas, and we don't know how the results will behave, but to me, just running through the model, they will not change. If anything, if we do the quota, they will be somewhere in between the fully segregated model and the actual, but they will also decrease in the Transfermarkt valuation, just not as so much. But we do see the point where the question must be, really formed realistically, phrased realistically as well. Stefan?
Yeah. I mean, I think I agree to some extent, Georgy, with that. I mean, I have a couple of issues here, which is we wanted a clean model, right? So segregation is the cleanest way to identify any possible effect. As Georgy says, if you have a quota, then you're going to have somewhere in between, and the implications, the welfare implications of quotas are tricky. And the second thing I want to say was that when people talk about when these diversity studies, one thing that's interesting to me is that the diversity studies in the sports literature, they posit two possible effects that we don't find at all. So one is that the diversity brings new ideas and improves the quality of team performance. And the counter argument is diversity creates discord and potential for disagreements and so forth, and that's negative. And some studies claim to find that diversity, the negative effects of diversity outweigh the positive effects of diversity. And so for the logical implication that if you believed those results, then segregation is the answer. That's in pure efficiency terms. So there's a sense in which segregation is the logical outcome of some of the results in the diversity literature.
Yeah, I mean, thanks for your answers. I would just, I think it would be interesting sort of to say, what would be the cost of a quota, and it would be useful to know. Okay, look, you're finding a 3% decline in predicted England win probability when you go to full segregation, which is a quota of 0 black players or 0 non-black players, and it would be somewhere in between. It would be interesting, I think it would be interesting to know. So, and I think it would be, England is going through a period where its average win probability is 70%. For other countries at the margin, things could make a difference. If you're more like a 50% winning probability team, and imposing quota could be more costly. So I think that would be an interesting section, but maybe a separate page.
Thanks, Daniel. Pete was next.
It's Pete, right?
Yeah, Pete. Yeah. First of all,
hi, Pete.
I really enjoyed the paper, and this is more of a tangential question and probably showing my ignorance. In North American sport leagues, a lot of times you see positional segregation. Is in soccer, like the quarterback tends to be white, or outfielders tend to be black. Is there ever been anything done on positional segregation in football, soccer?
There has, so we don't explicitly go there for the time's sake, but
No, I didn't mean it for you. I just meant just more curiosity. I don't expect it in your paper.
Yes, there is evidence specifically related to English football that black goalkeepers are underrepresented in goalkeeping. And for a very long time, the goalkeeper of the national team, as well as both substitute goalkeepers on the English men's national team, have been white. So, yeah, this is the only thing. But as we attempt to show here, this is not really defined by positional group. But I'll have to do more due diligence. But I don't think it's as, from prior scope of the literature, I don't think it's as distinct as what you say is the quarterback is white and the wide receiver is non-white.
Yeah, this
yes.
was more for curiosity reasons than anything. I didn't think it improved your paper. No, I like it the way it is.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thanks, Pete. Alex is next.
Thank you. Thank you again. Very interesting. Just a quick, I think I missed it. You are taking the data from 2016, right?
Yes.
And for the English case also, the kind of. So you use then in the end 80 observations for the English matches from 2016, correct?
2024, yes.
Is there any particular reason to do it? Because there is so much data before, but especially given the, are you taking the successful years of England on purpose, or because 2014 wasn't very good in terms of, so I don't know, how does this affect the results?
No, we did not specifically do it. Well, the first thing was operational reasons. We had to have a robust sample of matches where we could have clear indications of aggregate transfer market valuations. When we tried going beyond 2016, so to 2015, a lot of the national competitions from which we were getting these 116 tier 1 leagues, as well as the tier 2 and tier 3 leagues, are not very well represented in Transfermarkt. So, for instance, that led to a lot of the substitution of players who were playing, but they only had their first valuation in 2016. So if we extended back to 2015, we had to replace a lot of the players with missing valuations with that 10,000 mark. So then in the end, we had 3,380 matches, out of which for 40, we could not find the odds on Odds Portal. So hence the resulting sample is 3,340. And also these are competitive tournaments. So we don't have any friendly games. We don't have any invitational cup games. And as a matter of fact, if we want to look at the sample breakdown, could be in the additional slide, but yes. So we have the Nations League, the qualifications for the Euro itself, the Gold Cup, World Cup qualifiers, World Cup, Copa America, and I think the African Cup qualifiers and itself. And yes, so these are the tournaments that are only competitive, and we could not have a larger sample, but this is not tied in any way to the successful years of England. It's just among these 3,340 games dating back to 2016, England only played 80 competitive games in that era.
Okay, thank you.
And it's worth also saying 2016 was very bad from an English perspective. So you definitely caught some bad years there, Georgy. Dennis is next.
Thanks, Georgy. Very interesting. I have one sort of rephrasing of your results, and then a suggestion about the method. The rephrasing is, if you are the worst friggin' racist on the planet and you demand that your team be all white, the effect on the English national team success is almost non-existent, right? It's changes the winning probability by 3%. Or do I interpret that wrong?
No, you interpret that correctly. It's just, yeah, it is a statistically significant decrease of 3%. But yes, I also think that if you're the most racist person ever, I don't think you understand what magnitudinal difference and statistically significant difference would mean.
Well, yeah, that's a different argument. That's a different point, though. So I guess my point really is this is a small amount for an enormous amount of imposed racism. And for the people who potentially make such decisions, I think that they would understand. Now, my more relevant point, I think, the paper of mine with Peter Parshikoff that you mentioned earlier, one of the things that we find is that the Transfermarkt fees overstate the Transfermarkt reported values overstate what low value players fees will actually be and understate what high value players fees will actually be. So when you replace a Sacco with his 150 million euro transfer fee and replace him with a 45 million euro transfer fee, it seems to me that you're doing more than just that. The degree and the change in the quality of the team is perhaps not accurately stated by the change that you've got.
Yes, so thank you for that comment. So again, I think I tried my best, and maybe when we debrief it with Stefan, he will say I didn't do the absolute best and didn't bring the idea across clearly. But yes, so we don't just we look at it as a crowdsourced, very good estimator of player values at any given point, not necessarily what their actual transfer is going to be, whether or not it is overstated or understated. We do recognize this body of literature. However, we just look at it as the predictor of match outcomes. And the idea in Peter's 2018 is very simple, is just if you sum all of the player values on the team and you look at the ratio of team A to team B, the team with a higher aggregate score does better than the team with the lower aggregate Transfermarkt value. So we just wanted to use that in that context. We do understand that, yes, it's not perfect, and perhaps we could try a robustness check and see that when we do those weights that you suggest in your paper, say it is overvalued for high-ranked players and undervalued for low-ranked players versus the actual transfer fees, there's also the same. However, we have not done that yet, and I think Stefan wants to chime in.
Yeah, thanks. Georgy, I think you've done a great job presenting this, so well done. If you go to the slide with the comparing the validity slide, the with the results on it. Again, so what I would with all of this, it strikes me that I can't get away from thinking that the bookmaker odds are the upper bound on what is possible. So and I'm happy if somebody's going to tell me that's explain why that's wrong. But within that, I just suppose you're right, Dennis, and there is, and I'm sure there are biases. Of course, there are biases in Transfermarkt. I mean, I'd say also there are biases in reported transfer fees in the newspapers, but there are biases everywhere. The question is, what potential gain is there from identifying biases and eliminating them? So what we could get from out of these sort of 3,000 games, we could get maybe 15 game draw predictions correct, or we could get another 23 away win results. I mean, the potential gain of any adjustment is negligible. And I don't think we showed you the Breyer scores, but the Breyer scores are almost identical for these two models. So in that sense, I take your point that there must be always must be a way to improve this, but so of course with any method. But how much gain could there really be from any adjustment to the model? That's the thing I'm struggling with.
Well, I'm not arguing about the baseline model as relative to the bookmaker values. I'm thinking about when you swap out players on the team, you're no longer using the same sort of measure of value. You're assuming that there's a constant relative relationship between actual ability of the team and the transfer mark. But if you change from using one set of players whose values are too high for another set of players whose values are too low, I think that the relationship between the transfer mark of that constructed team and the transfer mark of the opposing team must be different, because the denominator in that hasn't been changed. You haven't swapped out overestimated for underestimated or vice versa in that context. And so I'm thinking that you might do better in the sense of becoming more accurate in your estimate of the probability once you've reformulated the team, if you account for the bias in the way the transfer mark values represent the low value players versus the high value players that you're swapping. Whether that gets you closer to the bookmaker value or not, I don't know. I agree 100%. The 3% is, to my mind, tiny, but I don't know if it's a 3% that is overestimated or a 3% that's underestimated. So if it were overestimated, it could actually be a larger number and more meaningful in some sense.
Well, but I don't. The problem with that is I think if you'd say there may be significant biases in the valuation of the players, and that might be true. And if that's true, then that's not just going to show up in our counterfactual exercise. That has to show up in our model, because there are, within these thousands of games, there are lots of players who are being underestimated and lots of players who are being overestimated. So within this, our model would be way off the bookmakers because of the systematic biases that are there. They're not. The point is, if the model is valid, then the counterfactual method's valid. If the model's not valid, then the counterfactual method's not valid. I don't see how you can say, well, the counterfactual method's not valid, even though your model is valid. I don't see how that's possible.
I think, if I'm understanding right, that you have the transfer mark value of the home team versus the transfer mark value of the away team. And so you do that, and that's the slide that's on the screen now. But then you change the home team, assuming Britain is the home team, you change for them the mixture of upward bias and downward bias, but you don't change that for their opponent. And that seems to me different, that the biases in the numerator and denominator cancel out in general in the baseline results that are on the screen now, but they don't cancel out once you've started substituting players.
I'm not sure that it's not that the bias. If there are lots of biases and then there's all this cancelling out, then that just introduces noise to the whole story, right? And so that's when the model is going to fail, because it's got all these biases written into it. If you took any set of data and then just randomly applied lots of biases, the biases might cancel out, but the predictive value of the model would decline significantly, because the biases would poke out in lots of different places, and that's not happening here. These models are. This model is accurately reproducing what the bookmakers think is the most likely outcome. So I think that's. So I think this is the difference between you're saying that you can have the model can be valid, but the counterfactual modeling can be biased. Whereas I'm saying if there are biases, they have to play out. They have to manifest themselves at both stages, both in the model and in the counterfactual exercise, I think.
I would agree that that's what we are disputing. Whether or not you're right or I'm right, I think, to borrow from earlier what Daniele said, is an empirical question. Anyways, that was just something that occurred to me.
But yeah, I'll just say we value your feedback, Dennis. Thank you for the suggestion. We will. No, I mean,
we'll give that bullshit all due consideration.
No. I try to bring you together to put like a good full stop on this, so that.
Thanks, Georgie.
No, come on. Like,
it's worth. I would just chime in and say that I think Dennis's point about the presentation of your results is really actually very important. I have a colleague who talks about the Daily Mail test, which is how the Daily Mail run with a set of results like this. You know, at the moment we've got a Reform UK by-election candidate for a by-election in Manchester, so could become an MP next month, who has explicitly said that he doesn't think you can be English and not white. You know, so these are the kinds of people who are starting to gain ascendancy in Reform UK ahead in the polls. And if therefore you get, getting rid of all the black players only reduces our probability of winning by 3%, who cares? You know, that is, potentially quite a worrying way of your, brilliantly put together results being distorted and twisted. So I think Dennis's point about the presentation of the results is really important. I don't think I've necessarily got any way in which you might better present that, but just to say that is something that I would be a little bit concerned about.
Yeah, so really quickly to answer that, and something that I forgot to mention before to Dennis. So yes, we understand that magnitudinally these are not small, these are not big drops in productivity, but then also what we're trying to do is we're establishing essentially a branch here that, in terms of the counterfactual modeling using TM values, I think this is the first paper that does it. And then we also use the case that is most understood by everyone in terms of, we associate football with England in a lot of the cases, plus there's a precedent in Stefan's prior research. So we're not saying that perhaps if someone were, or if we were to have another model like this run through another context, we might be seeing the drop-off that will be more significant. It's just that in England, and James, thank you for that insight into the more local politics, that yes, there are precedents where this might become sort of more relevant to the English context. However, say we cannot do this in some other context yet because we don't have, say, political precedent that's irritator per se to do a paper. But France and Italy are two of the other contexts we have identified. Maybe there is more than a 3% drop there. We're yet to test that. But
Daniele, quick final question before we wrap up.
Yeah, super. Not even a question, just like a suggestion. There seems to be a lot of comments around, oh, why don't you tweak the transfer market model a little bit, this way or this other way? And I think I take your position that it's probably not going to change much, but show it. Just do a bunch of robustness tests and show that the overall headline number, the 3%, becomes 3.1% or 2.9%, and doesn't make much of a difference. And the annoying referees will be happy.
Thank you very much for your suggestion. Thank you, everyone. This was really productive. Thank you all.
Yeah, thank you very much, Georgy. Thank you, Stefan. Thank you for your really interesting research. We will wrap up bang on time, so thank you for your exemplary timing as well, Georgy. We will return next week. I'll be presenting next week a title, How Good Were We? Using expected points and results to guide key performance indices when providing feedback. Before we wrap up, just to remind you again, do consider submitting an abstract to the Political Studies Association Sport and Politics Conference in Liverpool, and do consider submitting an abstract for the first Central Asian Conference in Sports Science in Tashkent in Uzbekistan. Thank you, everyone. Great to see you all. Have a great weekend. See you all again next week.
Thank you.
Cheers, everyone. Bye-bye.